10 minutes. One man whispered with a smirk as he watched the woman enter the restaurant. I give him 10 minutes before he makes an excuse and leaves. A few quiet laughs followed. Nobody challenged the comment. Nobody seemed surprised, because the woman walking toward the reserved table had spent most of her adult life hearing things just like that. Victoria Hayes noticed the stares before she even reached the hostess stand. She always did. Some people looked away quickly. Others weren't nearly as polite. It didn't matter whether she was attending a corporate summit, a charity gala, or a simple dinner reservation. The reaction was usually the same. First came the glance, then the judgment, then the assumption. They saw her size before they saw her face. They saw her body before they saw the woman who had built a billion-dollar company from a rented office barely larger than a storage closet. Tonight was supposed to be different. At least that was what her assistant had promised. He's a good man, Victoria, her assistant had insisted earlier that week. He's not interested in your money. He's not even interested in your title. Victoria hadn't believed her. Experience had taught her otherwise. Across the restaurant, Ethan Walker checked his watch and shifted slightly in his seat. The 40-year-old single dad wasn't sure why he'd agreed to this blind date in the first place. Between running his small home repair business and raising his 8-year-old daughter Lily, he barely had enough time to sleep. Dating felt like something from another lifetime. Still, his best friend had refused to take no for an answer. One dinner, he'd said. That's all I'm asking. Ethan had finally given in. Now he sat beneath the warm glow of hanging lights, listening to soft country music drifting through the restaurant while conversations buzzed around him. The scent of grilled steak and fresh bread filled the air. It should have felt relaxing. Instead, he felt completely out of place. Then he saw her. Victoria approached the table slowly. Her navy blue dress was elegant without trying too hard. Her blonde hair rested neatly on her shoulders. But what caught Ethan's attention wasn't any of that. It was her expression, the careful smile, the guarded eyes, the look of someone preparing herself for disappointment before a single word had been spoken. He stood immediately. Victoria, he asked. She looked slightly surprised. Yes. Ethan smiled warmly and pulled out her chair. It's nice to finally meet you. Victoria blinked. For a brief second, she wasn't sure how to respond. Most men spent the first few moments trying to impress her. Others became visibly uncomfortable. A few seemed disappointed. Ethan simply treated her like she belonged there, like she deserved respect, like she was just another person. Around the room, a few curious eyes continued watching. One man quietly nudged his friend. Wait, he muttered. He's actually staying? But Ethan didn't notice. If he did, he didn't care. Victoria sat down carefully. Thank you, she said. Of course. He took his seat across from her. For a moment, neither spoke. The soft clinking of silverware echoed around them. Candlelight flickered across the table. Then Ethan glanced toward the menu before looking back at her. Can I ask you something? Victoria felt herself tense. Here it comes, she thought. The usual questions. The company. The money. The headlines. Ethan tilted his head slightly. What was the best part of your day today? Victoria stared at him. Not because it was a complicated question, but because nobody had asked her that in years. And for the first time that evening, the wall around her heart shifted ever so slightly. Victoria lowered her eyes toward the candle flickering between them, buying herself a few seconds to think. Ethan's question should have been easy. Most people spent their conversations telling her about themselves, asking about her company, or trying to calculate what her last name was worth. Nobody ever asked what had made her smile that day. The silence stretched gently between them. Not uncomfortable, just unexpected. Finally, she released a small laugh. That is honestly the first time anyone has asked me that in a very long time. Ethan shrugged. Seems like a fair question. Another smile tugged at the corner of her lips. Then I suppose the best part of my day was finishing a project that took almost 8 months. That sounds important. It was. She paused. Affordable housing initiative. 320 new apartments. Ethan nodded immediately. That is a lot of families getting a second chance. Victoria blinked again. Most people would have responded by talking about profits, contracts, or headlines. Ethan's first thought had been families. Something about that unsettled her in the best possible way. Around them, the restaurant continued humming with activity. Servers carried trays between tables. Glasses clinked softly. Outside the large windows, the city lights shimmered against the dark evening sky. Yet Victoria found herself paying attention only to the man sitting across from her. Ethan glanced at the menu. Can I ask another question? Sure. What would you be doing right now if nobody knew who you were? Victoria laughed softly. You really do not ask normal questions. I know. His grin appeared for the first time. My daughter tells me that all the time. The mention of his daughter softened something in Victoria's expression. How old is she? 8. His face brightened immediately. Lily is convinced she is going to become either a veterinarian, a singer, or president of the United States. Victoria smiled. Those are ambitious options. She says she is keeping her options open. For the first time that evening, Victoria laughed without forcing it. The sound surprised even her. Ethan noticed. He did not comment on it. He simply smiled and allowed the moment to exist. That was another thing she was not used to. Most people tried too hard. They pushed conversations. They chased approval. Ethan seemed comfortable simply being present. Victoria looked down at her hands. The gold bracelet around her wrist reflected the candlelight. If nobody knew who I was, she said quietly, I think I would own a small bookstore somewhere. Ethan leaned forward slightly. A bookstore? I know it sounds ridiculous. Not at all. No board meetings. No interviews. No cameras. Just books, coffee, and people looking for stories. Ethan nodded slowly. Sounds peaceful. Victoria's smile faded just enough to reveal something deeper beneath it. I do not remember the last time life felt peaceful. The words escaped before she could stop them. For a moment she regretted saying them. But Ethan did not rush to fill the silence. He did not offer empty advice. He simply listened. Truly listened. That alone felt rare. Across the room, a young couple walked past their table. The man glanced toward Victoria and whispered something. The woman covered her mouth to hide a laugh. Victoria saw it. She always saw it. Years of experience had trained her eyes to catch those moments instantly. Her shoulders stiffened slightly. Ethan noticed the change. He followed her gaze briefly, then looked back at her. You okay? Victoria forced a smile. I am used to it. Ethan's expression softened. Maybe that does not mean you should have to be. The words landed quietly, but they stayed with her long after he said them. And for the first time in years, Victoria Hayes found herself wondering whether this dinner might be different from every other one that came before it. For a while, neither of them seemed interested in checking their phones. That alone felt unusual in a city where every conversation competed with notifications and deadlines. The waitress refilled their water glasses and quietly disappeared again. Outside, traffic rolled past in ribbons of white and red light. Inside, the restaurant had grown warmer, softer, almost insulated from the rest of the world. Ethan rested his hands on the table and studied Victoria for a moment. Not her appearance, not her designer watch, not the reputation that followed her into every room. He looked at her the way someone looks at a person whose story matters. Can I ask you something a little more personal? He said. Victoria raised an eyebrow. You have already asked several personal questions. Ethan laughed. Fair point. She found herself smiling again. Go ahead. Ethan hesitated just long enough to choose his words carefully. When was the last time you were genuinely happy? The smile disappeared from Victoria's face. Not because she was offended, because she did not have an answer. The question settled over the table. Like a quiet snowfall, she stared at the candle between them. The flame danced gently in the center of the glass holder. 5 seconds passed. Then 10. Ethan did not rush her. He simply waited. Victoria swallowed slowly. I do not know. Her own answer surprised her. Ethan remained silent. I know moments when I felt successful, she continued. Moments when I felt relieved. Moments when I felt proud. Her eyes drifted toward the window. But happy? She shook her head. I honestly cannot remember. The admission left her feeling strangely exposed. For years she had mastered boardrooms, negotiations, interviews, and public appearances. Yet one simple question had uncovered something she had spent a long time avoiding. Ethan nodded thoughtfully. That sounds exhausting. Victoria let out a quiet laugh. Most people would tell me how lucky I am. You are successful, Ethan said. That does not automatically mean you are happy. The words landed with surprising weight. She looked at him carefully. You really believe that? Absolutely. He smiled faintly. I know people with very little who are grateful every day. And I know people with everything who feel lonely sitting in a room full of people. Victoria lowered her eyes. Loneliness. There was that word again. The one she never admitted out loud. Around her, The world always seemed crowded. Employees, executives, investors, journalists, advisors. Yet most evenings she returned to a penthouse apartment that felt quieter than an empty church. Ethan broke the silence gently. What would make you happy? Victoria opened her mouth and stopped. The answer should have been obvious. Instead, her mind went blank. She thought about private jets, luxury homes, awards, magazine covers. None of them appeared. Finally, she whispered, I think I would like one day where nobody expected anything from me. Ethan's expression softened. That sounds reasonable. Victoria laughed through a sudden wave of emotion she could not explain. You are the first person who has ever said that. Ethan shrugged. Everybody deserves a little peace. For a moment, neither spoke. The restaurant noise faded into the background. The candlelight flickered across the table. And somewhere deep inside Victoria Hayes, a wall she had spent years building developed its first visible crack. The dinner lasted far longer than either of them expected. What was supposed to be a simple meal stretched into nearly 3 hours of conversation, laughter, and quiet reflection. By the time they stepped outside, the night air carried a gentle spring chill. Streetlights cast warm pools of gold across the sidewalk as people drifted past on their way home. Ethan glanced at his watch and smiled apologetically. I should probably get going. Victoria nodded, though a small part of her wished the evening was not ending yet. Your daughter? School tomorrow. He laughed softly. And trust me, Lily takes punctuality very seriously. Victoria smiled. She sounds remarkable. I happen to agree. They stood there for a moment, neither quite ready to say goodbye. Then Ethan's phone buzzed. He glanced down and immediately chuckled. Speaking of remarkable, Victoria tilted her head. Lily. He answered the call and put it on speaker. A bright young voice instantly filled the quiet sidewalk. Dad, are you still on your date? Ethan shook his head with amused embarrassment. Hello to you too. That was my hello. Victoria laughed before she could stop herself. There was something refreshingly honest about the little girl. Did you have fun? Lily asked. Ethan glanced toward Victoria. Actually, yes. See? I told you. Victoria raised an eyebrow. You told him? Of course, Lily said confidently. Dad always says he is too busy to meet people. Ethan groaned. Lily. What? It is true. Victoria covered her smile. The conversation felt effortless, natural in a way she had not experienced in years. Then Lily spoke again. Is she nice? Ethan looked at Victoria. Very. There was no hesitation in his answer. None at all. Victoria felt an unexpected warmth spread through her chest. Good, Lily replied. Because nice people are hard to find. For a brief second, nobody spoke. Children sometimes had a way of cutting directly through the noise and finding the truth. Ethan eventually ended the call after promising to be home soon. As he slipped the phone back into his pocket, Victoria noticed the softness in his expression. She means everything to you. Ethan nodded immediately. She does. The answer came so quickly that it needed no explanation. Victoria looked away for a moment. She had spent years building companies, leading teams, and chasing impossible goals. Yet standing there beneath the city lights, she found herself admiring something much simpler. Devotion, presence, love that expected nothing in return. Would you like to meet her sometime? Ethan asked suddenly. Victoria blinked. Really? If we do this again? He smiled. And I would like to do this again. For the first time all evening, Victoria felt genuinely nervous. Not because she was a CEO, not because she was accustomed to pressure, but because meeting someone's child felt more meaningful than any boardroom introduction she had ever experienced. A slow smile appeared on her face. I would like that. Neither of them noticed the shift taking place. Neither realized that somewhere between dinner and a simple phone call, the evening had stopped feeling like a date arranged by other people. It had become something far more dangerous and far more beautiful. Hope. Over the next several weeks, something unusual began to take shape between them. It did not arrive with grand gestures or dramatic declarations. It grew quietly, one conversation at a time, one shared laugh at a time, one ordinary moment after another. On a bright Saturday afternoon, Victoria found herself standing outside Ethan's modest house on a tree-lined street just outside the city. The white paint on the porch railing was slightly weathered. A wind chime swayed gently near the front door. It felt warm and lived in, the kind of place built from memories rather than money. Before she could knock, the front door flew open. You came. Lily announced as if they were already old friends. Victoria laughed. I did. Lily grabbed her hand without hesitation and pulled her inside. Ethan shook his head from the kitchen. I apologize in advance. She has been counting down all morning. Dad has been cleaning all morning, Lily corrected. That is not true. It is. Completely true. Victoria smiled as she watched them. The house was filled with small signs of real life. Family photographs. School drawings attached to the refrigerator. A half-finished puzzle spread across the dining room table. Nothing matched perfectly. Nothing looked expensive. Yet everything felt genuine. For the first time in years, Victoria felt oddly comfortable. Later that afternoon, the three of them sat on the back porch eating homemade lemonade popsicles Lily had insisted on making herself. The summer air carried the scent of freshly cut grass. Birds chirped from nearby trees. Somewhere in the neighborhood, a lawn mower hummed softly. It was peaceful. The kind of peace Victoria once thought existed only in movies. Lily chatted endlessly about school, books, and her future plans. Victoria listened carefully, answering every question. Not because she felt obligated, because she genuinely enjoyed it. At one point, Lily disappeared into the house and returned carrying a small notebook. What is that? Victoria asked. My important notebook. Lily sat beside her. I write down things I learn about people. Ethan groaned immediately. Oh no. What? Lily opened the notebook proudly. Dad is on page 3. Victoria laughed. And what does page 3 say? Lily looked down. Dad always helps people even when nobody notices. Ethan rubbed the back of his neck. Lily, it is true. She turned another page. Now I need a page for you. Victoria's smile softened. For me? Lily nodded seriously. What should I write? Victoria opened her mouth, but found herself unexpectedly speechless. In boardrooms, she could answer any question. Yet this one felt different. Before she could respond, Ethan spoke. Write that she listens. Victoria looked at him. Ethan simply shrugged. You do. The moment lasted only a second, but it stayed with her. Because he had noticed something no magazine article, investor report, or public award had ever mentioned. He saw who she was when nobody was looking. As the afternoon sun drifted lower across the yard, Victoria found herself watching Ethan and Lily together. The easy way they laughed. The trust between them. The quiet dignity of a man who had built a meaningful life without needing anyone's approval. And for the first time in a very long time, Victoria felt something dangerous beginning to grow. Not admiration, not curiosity, something deeper, something she had spent years convincing herself she no longer needed. Meanwhile, Ethan watched Lily excitedly add a new page to her notebook. He smiled without realizing that across the porch, Victoria was becoming far more important to both of them than either was prepared to admit. For a while, it seemed as though life had finally decided to be gentle. The weeks passed with a quiet rhythm that none of them wanted to disturb. Victoria visited often. Sometimes she joined Ethan and Lily for dinner. Sometimes she stopped by after work with a box of pastries from a small bakery she loved. Other times, she simply sat on the porch while Lily talked about school projects and impossible dreams. It felt normal, wonderfully normal. But peace has a way of attracting attention. One Monday morning, Victoria stepped into the executive boardroom on the 42nd floor of Hayes Ventures and immediately sensed something was wrong. The room felt colder than usual. Several board members avoided eye contact. Others seemed unusually interested in their coffee cups. At the far end of the table sat Richard Holloway, one of the company's largest investors. His expensive suit was perfectly tailored. His smile was perfectly practiced, and neither reached his eyes. Victoria, he said smoothly. Before we begin, there is a matter we should discuss. Victoria remained calm. Go ahead. Richard slid a tablet across the table. This. She looked down. Her stomach tightened. A photograph filled the screen. She recognized it instantly. Ethan and Lily sitting beside her at a local farmer's market the previous weekend. Lily was laughing. Ethan was holding a paper cup of lemonade. Victoria had been smiling at something neither camera nor photographer could capture. Another image followed. Then another. Then another. Private moments. Ordinary moments. Human moments. Someone has been selling photographs to several media outlets, Richard explained. The room remained silent. Victoria looked around the table. And Richard folded his hands. Investors are concerned. Concerned about what? Perception. Victoria's eyes narrowed slightly. Meaning? Nobody answered immediately. Finally, one board member cleared his throat. There are questions about whether this relationship is appropriate. Another spoke up carefully. The headlines are becoming distracting. Victoria understood exactly what they meant. She had seen the articles that morning. Some mocked Ethan. Others suggested he was pursuing her for money. A few were even crueler. None of them knew him. None of them cared to. To them, he was simply a convenient story. Richard leaned back in his chair. You have spent years building a very specific public image. Victoria's voice remained steady. And you may want to consider creating some distance. The room fell silent. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city stretched endlessly beneath the morning sun. Inside, something shifted. Victoria looked at the faces around the table. Powerful people, successful people, intelligent people. Yet none of them were discussing character. None were discussing kindness. None were discussing the happiness she had finally begun to rediscover. They were discussing optics. Distance, she repeated quietly. Richard nodded. It may be the responsible decision. Meanwhile, across town, Ethan was repairing a front porch railing for an elderly customer when his phone began vibrating repeatedly. Text messages, missed calls, notifications. He ignored them until lunch. Then he finally opened one of the articles. His expression changed immediately. The comments were worse than the headlines. Strangers questioned his motives. Others laughed at Victoria. Some mocked both of them. Ethan slowly locked the screen and slipped the phone back into his pocket. The afternoon breeze rustled through nearby trees. Somewhere down the block, children rode bicycles beneath the summer sun. Yet for the first time in weeks, an uneasy feeling settled into his chest. Because he suddenly realized that the world had noticed something beautiful, and the world was already trying to tear it apart. The next few days felt different. The easy rhythm that had quietly grown between them suddenly carried weight neither of them had expected. Victoria continued attending meetings, interviews, and investor calls. Ethan continued repairing homes, picking up Lily from school, and living the same simple life he always had. Yet the noise surrounding them kept growing louder. One Thursday evening, Victoria stood near the back of a crowded ballroom during a charity fundraiser hosted by several major corporations. Crystal chandeliers hung overhead. Soft piano music drifted through the room. Hundreds of guests moved between white-clothed tables, exchanging business cards and carefully rehearsed smiles. Victoria normally handled these events with ease. Tonight felt different. She could feel people watching her, whispering, evaluating. Across the room, Richard Holloway stood with several investors. Their conversation appeared casual, but Victoria noticed how often her name surfaced. She also noticed the occasional glance in her direction. The same glance she had seen her entire life. Judgment disguised as concern. Then she heard it. She is making an emotional mistake. The voice belonged to Richard. He was not speaking loudly. He simply did not realize she was close enough to hear. Another investor nodded. The man seems harmless enough. Richard laughed softly. That is not the point. Then what is? Perception matters. People expect more from someone in her position. Victoria froze. A third investor lowered his voice. Do you really think he is interested in her? Richard's smile widened slightly. Come on. Let us be realistic. Nobody walks away from that kind of money. The words landed like ice. Not because they insulted her. Because they insulted Ethan. They reduced everything she had come to admire about him into a cynical transaction. They transformed kindness into strategy, respect into manipulation. Before Victoria could respond, another familiar voice spoke from behind them. You are wrong. The small circle turned. Ethan stood several feet away. Nobody had noticed him arrive. He wore a simple navy sport coat and a white dress shirt. Nothing flashy. Nothing designed to impress. Yet, the calm confidence in his posture immediately changed the atmosphere. Richard blinked. Excuse me. Ethan stepped forward. You said nobody walks away from that kind of money. His voice remained steady. You are wrong. Several nearby conversations began fading as people sensed tension. Richard folded his arms. And why is that? Ethan looked directly at him. Because the first thing I liked about Victoria had absolutely nothing to do with money. Silence followed. Richard smirked. Really? Ethan nodded. I liked the way she listened. Another pause. I liked the way she cared about people she would never meet. I liked the way she laughed when she forgot she was supposed to be impressive. The room grew noticeably quieter. Ethan continued. The truth is, most people spend their time noticing things about Victoria that do not matter. Nobody interrupted him. They noticed headlines. They noticed numbers. They noticed appearances. His eyes shifted briefly toward Victoria. I noticed a human being. Complete silence settled over the group. Even Richard seemed uncertain how to respond. Ethan did not sound angry. He did not sound defensive. He simply sounded honest. And somehow that made his words impossible to dismiss. Across the ballroom, Victoria felt her throat tighten. Because for the first time in her life, someone had publicly defended her without trying to gain anything in return. And in that moment, surrounded by wealth, influence, and power, the most respected person in the room was not the investor, the executive, or the celebrity. It was the single father who had chosen dignity when everyone else chose judgment. The story spread faster than anyone expected. By the following week, clips from the charity event had appeared everywhere. Some people mocked it. Others praised it. But something surprising happened. For the first time, thousands of strangers were talking about kindness instead of appearances. Victoria tried to ignore the attention and focus on work. Yet Ethan's words stayed with her. They followed her through meetings, interviews, and long evenings in her office. I noticed a human being. Nobody had ever said anything like that before. Not publicly, not privately, especially not someone who had nothing to gain. 3 days later, Hayes Ventures hosted its annual Community Impact Gala. More than 1,000 guests filled the Grand Convention Center. Business leaders, nonprofit organizations, educators, and local officials gathered beneath enormous crystal lights that reflected across polished marble floors. Television cameras lined the back wall. Reporters moved between tables collecting interviews. It was one of the most important nights of the year for the company. Victoria stood backstage reviewing her speech. Usually she felt confident before public appearances. Tonight was different. Her hands trembled slightly, not because she feared speaking, because she knew she was about to tell the truth. Beyond the curtain, the audience settled into their seats. Near the back of the ballroom, Ethan sat beside Lily at a reserved table. Neither expected special attention. They had simply come to support Victoria. Lily swung her feet beneath her chair and looked toward the stage. "Do you think she is nervous?" she whispered. Ethan smiled. "Probably." Lily nodded. "That means she is brave." Moments later, the lights dimmed. The crowd applauded as Victoria walked onto the stage. She stood behind the podium and looked across the sea of faces. For a moment, she forgot every prepared sentence, every carefully edited remark, every polished talking point. Then she saw Ethan and Lily. Something inside her settled. "Good evening," she began. The room quieted immediately. "Tonight I was supposed to speak about projects, investments, and future goals." She paused. "Instead, I would like to talk about people." Several guests exchanged curious glances. Victoria took a slow breath. "Most of my life, people have noticed things about me before they noticed me." Complete silence filled the ballroom. They noticed my success. Another pause. They noticed my appearance. Her voice softened. They noticed everything except who I actually was. Nobody moved. Nobody looked away. A few months ago, I met someone who asked me a question no one had asked in years. Her eyes found Ethan. He asked when I was last truly happy. The audience remained perfectly still. He never asked how much money I had. Victoria's voice trembled slightly. He never asked what company I owned. She smiled through gathering emotion. He simply treated me with respect. The silence became profound. The kind of silence that cannot be forced. The kind that appears only when people recognize truth. Then Victoria looked toward Lily. And his daughter reminded me that kindness is still possible. Lily's eyes widened. Around the ballroom, people began blinking away tears. Not because the speech was dramatic, because it was honest. Victoria stepped away from the podium. The audience rose slowly to their feet. Not all at once. One person, then another, then hundreds more. Applause filled the room, but Ethan barely heard it. Because in that moment, Victoria was not being celebrated for her wealth, her title, or her accomplishments. She was being celebrated for something far more valuable. She was finally being seen. 1 year later, the first warm Saturday of spring arrived with clear blue skies and a gentle breeze moving through the neighborhood trees. The grass in Ethan's yard had finally turned green again after winter. Birds hopped across the fence line. Somewhere down the street, children laughed as they chased one another through sprinklers. It was the kind of ordinary day most people would forget. Ethan treasured days like this. He knelt beside an old wooden porch swing, tightening the final bolt with a wrench. The swing had belonged to Lily's grandparents years ago. Time and weather had left their marks on it, but Ethan had spent several weekends restoring it piece by piece. He stepped back and tested it gently. Solid, reliable, built to last, just the way he liked things. The sound of a car door closing reached him from the driveway. Before he could turn around, a familiar voice called out, "Dad, she is here." Ethan smiled immediately. Lily raced across the yard, her long hair bouncing behind her. At 9 years old, she seemed taller every month. She wrapped her arms around him before pointing excitedly toward the driveway. Victoria stood beside her car, smiling as she watched them. There were no reporters, no photographers, no executives, no headlines, just Victoria. Over the past year, many things had changed. Some investors had eventually stopped complaining. Public attention had shifted elsewhere. The world had moved on to newer stories. Yet the people who mattered had stayed. Victoria walked across the lawn carrying a small picnic basket. "I brought lunch." Lily cheered. "Please tell me there are cookies." "There are definitely cookies." Ethan laughed. "You spoil her." Victoria raised an eyebrow. "I learned from the best." Lily immediately grabbed the basket and disappeared inside the house to inspect its contents. Her footsteps echoed through the hallway. Ethan and Victoria found themselves standing alone beneath the afternoon sun. For a moment, neither spoke. They did not need to. The silence between them no longer felt uncertain. It felt comfortable, earned. Victoria looked toward the restored swing. "You finished it." "This morning." She ran her hand lightly across the smooth wood. "It is beautiful." Ethan smiled. "Sit down." Victoria lowered herself onto the swing. It moved gently beneath her. The breeze carried the scent of blooming flowers from a nearby garden. She closed her eyes for a moment and simply breathed. Peace. Real peace. The kind she once believed could never belong to her. Ethan sat beside her. The swing rocked slowly. Back and forth. Back and forth. After a while, Victoria opened her eyes. "Do you remember the first question you ever asked me?" Ethan laughed softly. "Probably not. You asked when I was last truly happy." His smile faded into curiosity. "And?" Victoria looked toward the house where Lily was now pressed against the kitchen window, making faces at them. "Now I know the answer." Ethan followed her gaze. Lily waved dramatically. Both adults laughed. Victoria leaned back against the swing and felt the warmth of the sun on her face. Success had brought her recognition. Money had brought her comfort. But neither had given her what she found here. Acceptance. Respect. Family. The swing continued moving gently as afternoon sunlight painted long shadows across the yard. No grand speeches followed. No dramatic declarations. Just three. People sharing a quiet day together. Sometimes the greatest miracle is not becoming someone new. Sometimes it is finally finding the people who allow you to be yourself. And as laughter drifted from the little house behind them, the kind that comes from trust, healing, and second chances, all three finally understood something simple and beautiful. Home is not a place you buy. It is a place where you are seen, where you are valued, and where you are loved exactly as you are. Thank you for watching. Subscribe for more stories of courage, kindness, and second chances, because the people the world overlooks often leave the greatest impact.